Imagine standing on the shores of the eastern Mediterranean 3,000 years ago. You aren't looking at a peaceful sunset. You are looking at the end of the world. The greatest empires the earth had ever seen, the mighty Hittites, the legendary Mycenaeans of Greece, and the golden new kingdom of Egypt, are all screaming in terror. Cities are burning, trade routes are vanishing, literacy itself is being wiped out. And at the center of this chaos is a mystery that has haunted historians for centuries, a shadowy confederation of seafaring warriors known simply as the Sea People. For decades, we had nothing but their names and a few terrifying carvings on Egyptian walls. They appeared from the mist, toppled civilizations, and then seemingly vanished into the footnotes of history. But now, the mystery is over. A groundbreaking DNA study has finally cracked the code, revealing exactly where these ancient marauders came from and why they were so desperate to find a new home. If you have ever dreamed of walking through the ruins of lost civilizations or wondered if ancient myths were actually based on true stories of survival, then today's journey is for you. We are tracing the DNA trail from the islands of the Mediterranean to the ancient ports of the Levant to uncover the truth about the people who reset the course of human history. To understand the magnitude of this discovery, we first have to realize just how advanced the world was before it all came crashing down. The Late Bronze Age was an era of unprecedented globalization. You had the Egyptians in the south, the Hittites in what is now Turkey, and the Greeks of the Trojan War era in the west. They weren't isolated. They were deeply connected by trade in tin, copper, and luxury goods. Then, around 1177 BC, everything stopped. The king of Ugarit, a wealthy port city in modern-day Syria, sent a desperate letter to a neighboring ruler saying, "The enemy ships are here, my cities are burned, and they have done evil things in my country." That was the last thing he ever wrote. The city was leveled. It was a domino effect of destruction. But who were these enemies? The Egyptians under Ramses III fought them in a massive naval battle and recorded their names on the walls of the Medinag Habu temple. They spoke of the Peleset, the Checker, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, and the Weshesh. These names sounded like shadows, echoes of cultures we didn't fully understand. For a long time, the leading theory was that they were just pirates or Vikings of the Bronze Age, but the truth was far more complex. The first major clue didn't come from a dusty scroll, but from the soil of an ancient city called Ashkelon in modern-day Israel. Ashkelon was one of the 5 great cities of the Philistines, the most famous group of sea people mentioned in the Bible. Archaeologists had been digging there for 30 years, but it wasn't until 2016 that they hit the jackpot, a Philistine cemetery. This was the first time we had a large enough sample of skeletons to perform a deep genetic analysis. Researchers from the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History took samples from 10 individuals buried in Ashkelon, spanning different time periods. The results were a bombshell. The individuals buried during the initial settlement of the city carried a distinct genetic signature that wasn't present in the local population. It was a signature that pointed directly to southern Europe. Specifically, the DNA showed links to the Aegean, Sardinia, and even the Iberian Peninsula. We finally had a smoking gun. The Sea People weren't just a local uprising, they were migrants from across the sea. But wait, it gets even more interesting. When the researchers tested skeletons from just 200 years later, that European DNA signature had almost entirely vanished. It had been diluted by the local Levantine gene pool. This tells us something profound about the Sea People. They weren't just a conquering army that replaced everyone. They were a group of people who arrived, fought for a foothold, and then quickly integrated into the local culture. They became the Philistines we read about in history books, blending their Aegean traditions with the customs of the Canaanites. This wasn't a simple invasion. It was a migration born of desperation. This brings us to the travel side of this mystery. If you want to see where this story began, you have to go to the places these people fled from. Think about the rugged coastlines of Crete or the mysterious Nuragic towers of Sardinia. In Sardinia, you can still visit the Nuraghe, these massive stone fortresses built by a people who were master stonemasons. Many historians now believe the Shardana, one of the tribes of the Sea People, were actually from Sardinia. When you walk through the ruins of Nuraghe and Barumini, you aren't just looking at old rocks, you are looking at the home of the warriors who once shook the throne of the pharaohs. Imagine the courage it took to pack your entire family into a wooden ship and sail toward the unknown because your homeland was no longer habitable. Because that is the real secret the DNA and the archaeology have revealed. The Sea People weren't the cause of the Bronze Age collapse, they were a symptom of it. New environmental data, including studies of ancient pollen and stalagmites in caves, show that a massive, centuries-long drought hit the Mediterranean during this time. The crops failed, the trade routes broke, the empires couldn't feed their people. The Sea People were refugees of a climate catastrophe. They were people whose worlds had already ended, and they were looking for any place where they could survive. This changes the way we look at sites like Medinet Habu in Egypt. When you stand before those towering reliefs and see the Egyptian soldiers pulling the sea people off their ships with grappling hooks, you see a story of defense. But if you look closer at the carvings, you see something the Egyptians didn't focus on: ox carts. The sea people didn't just come with swords and spears. They came with their wives, their children, and their household goods in heavy wagons. You don't bring your kids and your cattle to a quick pirate raid. You bring them when you are never going back home. This realization makes the journey to these archaeological sites so much more moving. When you visit the excavations at Ashkelon today, you can see the Mediterranean waves crashing against the ancient seawall. You can walk through the Canaanite gate and imagine the moment the first sea people ships appeared on the horizon. For the locals, it was a nightmare. For the arrivals, it was their last hope. The DNA secret has transformed these people from nameless monsters into human beings we can finally identify. They were the displaced descendants of the Mycenaeans, fleeing the collapse of the palaces at Mycenae and Tyrannus. They were Sardinians and Sicilians looking for greener pastures. They were a melting pot of Mediterranean survivors. So what does this mean for us today? It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of dates. It's a story of movement, adaptation, and survival. The sea people didn't destroy civilization. They ushered in a new one. Out of the ashes of the Bronze Age came the Iron Age, the rise of the Phoenicians, the Greeks, and eventually the world we know today. Their genetic legacy might have been diluted in the Levant, but their impact on the map of the world is permanent. If you ever find yourself traveling through the Mediterranean, don't just look at the famous monuments. Look at the small, hidden coves. Look at the rugged mountain fortresses. Think about the families who once looked out at the sea and decided to risk everything for a future. The DNA has spoken, and the ghosts of the sea people are finally telling their side of the story. If this deep dive into the hidden chapters of our past fascinated you, make sure to subscribe and join us for our next expedition into the mysteries of the ancient world. There are still so many secrets buried in the sand and written in our genes, and we are just getting started uncovering them. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey. Until then, keep exploring, and remember that the past is never as far away as it seems.